So I was asked to talk a bit about management and how to get management involved as we kind of progress in the relationship with our client. And if I step back for a second, if you've watched any of the past videos that we've done, I'm a huge proponent of management. I think you should get into the management program as quickly as possible. People would say, well, I've got to learn the sales stuff first. I don't disagree, but I think you could still have managers in your program on how to reinforce Sandler, or you could be using the Sandler sales stuff and turn it into a management topic. For instance, if you taught DISC in foundations or you taught DISC in mastery, why can't we do DISC for managers? And then, who you are, but then focus on their people. And that's true with upfront contracts and anything else. So when I first started, I had two issues when I started management training. One, I was probably a third of the age of anyone that was in my program. So there was a bit of a credibility issue. Two, I had not managed a sales force, because I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s, probably early 30s when I was started to do the management stuff for Sandler. So I spent the first 2 years when I was with Steve Tabak really working with managers on the sales stuff because I didn't know any better. So I know you could do that. My point is, I think we should get in front of those managers as much as we can and get them involved as much as we can. Because what I typically see is that senior leaders make a decision that they want to do Sandler. Now, everybody's excited. We do a program. People are coming to our mastery classes if that's part of it. And at some point, after the first initial, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, which is hopefully the majority of the people sitting in your programs, but you tend to have some people who aren't really participating as much as we would want them to participate. Or that they're quite not hostages, but they're not, they may be vacationers. They're not sitting there saying, oh my goodness gracious, thank goodness I gave up a day or two for this. This is going to be awesome. And so they're very hesitant. Typically, they're people who have their own way of doing things. Oftentimes, they're people who are been there a long time, veterans. Sometimes they're top producers, but I think you should pick off the top producers before you start any program anyways. But here nor there, that tends to be that group. So now if I fast forward, people are excited. But here comes the question. How do I make sure people are using it? How do I get an ROI? I don't know if you guys, are you hearing, hey, how do we measure ROI? It comes up all the time, right? So people are trying to figure out what's the return on investment. That's not today's talk, but the issue is on the return on investment, most organizations, and I would have to say 9 out of 10, can't even track their own data properly. So for them to come back and say, well, here's the before and after Sandler, it's a fantasy. They're hoping that we can bring something to the table that they currently can't do. I mean, that's the way it is over here in the US, which of course, we're a decade or so behind. So that's how it is here. Now, I think also we should get to the managers from common sense. We've said this 100 times, on stage, which is they control budget. They also are transient. What does that mean? That means that if you do a good job and focus on managers and help them become better managers and help their people become more productive, they will take you to every company that they go to, every single company. And certainly in the tech world, as an example, the greatest companies to prospect. I mean, there are certain companies like a Salesforce, like an Oracle, that just have, so much turnover that these leaders bring you into their new companies. And I think they go into a new company with the position of, hey, you're here to make a change. And that's certainly more, important than if a salesperson brings you in on a referral. Of course, you've got to navigate your way up. Also, from the research center, we know that most managers do not have experience going into that role. We know that more and more people are not hitting quota, so it's ripe. So then here comes the question. How do we drive Sandler to make it part of the DNA? Now, there's probably about 17, 18 things on this list that I've created. I'm asked this all the time from senior leadership, because I also think that if we want it, most salespeople that are in the class want it to work. senior leadership wants it to work. It's middle management that will make or break any implementation that we have. Because if they're not reinforcing or supporting it, then we're in trouble, because you're going to teach upfront contracts and they're going to say, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to do it the way we've always done it. So we need them to be managers of change. We need them to be the ambassadors to bring Sandler into their teams. So that's really important, because I would always say, it's going to make or break based on sales management. So I always think sales management should come first into a program. But when I'm brought in, and it just happened yesterday, somebody said, hey, listen, how do we drive this to become part of our DNA? How do we make sure that everybody's using it? How do we make sure that we capitalize on this, on this investment? And so I've created a list. I'll explain it to you. It's not going to spend that much time explaining it to you, because in fairness, I think, we know 99% of this, but I know we have different lengths in the business in today's program. So we'll spend some time on each of them. Feel free to ask questions. There is no reason why a company will do all of these. I think it's a little much. It's probably impossible, but you can pick and choose. I allow the client to pick and choose, and I come with recommendations based on what I know about the company and what I've been told. I think we should start with these three, but they tend to go with those, but you can do it any way that you'd like. So let's go through. We okay on setting the stage? Thumbs up. Okay. All right, here we go. So again, now we're talking to managers, right? So this is not for you. This is from you to them. So you can use this as is. And so I'll say to people, hey, listen, sending people to Sandler thinking that, they're going to come back fully trained and they're into it, that's awesome. But it's kind of like sending your kids to school. You have some responsibility, as far as what they should be doing before and after school. So let's talk about what are you doing to engage your salespeople or your sales managers? Are you sitting down to say, hey, we're going to a Rosso prospecting program, right? We're going to sit in on that boot camp where we're doing this. What are the 2 or 3 things that you're hoping to get out of that prospecting seminar? They've already bought Sandler. So you're going to do a reinforcement, let's say, of any of the foundation topics. But managers should be asking their participants, hey, the upcoming topic is budget. What are 2 or 3 things that you want to get out of that? Because otherwise they're going saying, teach me, absorb. I'm pretty sure that I'll hear something that I like, versus I'm looking to hear this because that impacts my business. That impacts the way I personally go and sell. And so that's why we want to make that connection from a sales management perspective. You want to know what your people are thinking, and chances are maybe nothing. But if they say, here are the 2 things that I would like to get out of it, that's a conversation starter. Well, I'd like to figure out how to get out of a comfort zone. Okay, why did you pick that one? And now it's a good conversation for additional coaching and training. Same thing happens. It's just like sales. It's called the pre-call planner, post-call. This is a pre-call, what would you like? And a post-call, what did you get out of it? So I would be doing this all the time. If you can't do it face-to-face, certainly have them send you an email. It's very simple to do, but it focuses them on listening and participating and understanding how they're going to implement the content. Hot list items. So, the trainers create hot list items. And hot list items, you may not know this, Mr. CRO or Miss CRO. Here's the thing. When people have they're taking copious notes, and I'm sure that they're going to review them on a daily basis, but they tend to get lost. They tend to get put on the shelf, with all the other training trophies that they've collected over time, and all the good ideas that they had the intentions, they don't go back and review them. And we all know that that's true for anything that we do. So what we do is we create a hot list, which is a list of things that they take throughout the day, of genius attacks that they've heard from others or from us that says, I could use that in my business. I'm gonna figure out how to run with that one. So out of, my goal personally is to have people write down anywhere from 20 to 25 hot list items per day. So that means that your people have some hot list items. So here's what I would suggest. If you want to drive it down, we're going to be teaching the Sandler selling system, and that's what's important to you for consistency and DNA. But let's find out what's important to them, again, for additional coaching, but also let's pick 2 or 3 of these hot list items that we should be working on first, because less is more. When you try to change everything that you're doing from a sales perspective, it gets very confusing and there's a lot of, anxiety. So if we were to say that here are the hot lists, I would collect those by individual. I would create a team hot list. And then once I had that, I know where I'm going to be coaching and training individually because they wrote, hey, I think this is a good idea. I'm going to implement that. Well, if they thought it was a good idea and they're going to implement that, there must be a reason for that, right? And so that's a good conversation starter. But if I had a list of, let's say 30 items, I think you should take 3 a quarter, maybe 2 a quarter, and say, these are the big ones that we're going to focus in on as a team. We're going to do clear next steps as an example, and that's what we're working on. That's it. We're going to create very specific muscle memory. I want everybody to be using that over a period of time so it becomes a habit, and then we'll talk about some others. You as a leader could also say, though, Mary, you had this on your hot list, and I think you and I should be working on that above and beyond. And you could be doing that in your one-on-one meetings if you find it's appropriate. But this is a winner. You should figure out where these are. And by the way, if you want to do a hot list from an ROI, I always look at ROI. Are people engaged? You know, do they see value? Are they implementing it? Right here is they see value in those topics. The question is now, how do we help them implement it? So here's the next one. We have to be congruent, use Sandler terms. So, you know, if we say upfront contract and you're saying something else, there's a disconnect. And maybe you're saying it the same in your head, but what you say and what they hear are different. So let's sit down and pick the terms that are appropriate for the business. And those are the ones that you should use. We should probably come up with maybe 5 to 10, right? We've got thousands of them, but you don't need to know all that. But if you want your people to get a monkey's paw, we taught that last time, then we should say, hey, what's the monkey's paw, right? Versus, hey, what's our foot in the door strategy? They don't know what that means because we're teaching them a language, right? Common, consistency. So we need to use that. So let's spend half an hour as a management team and come up with the ones that are most important to us and then use them all the time. Sandler tools. Look, we've got over 100 and some odd tools. You're not going to use every tool. We've got a tool to create stuff. And we've got tools to prepare. And I think you've got to figure out which tools are good for you. You know, so again, I have a recommendation. I think that these 5 tools are good for you. The rest are nice to haves and probably situational, but let's talk about it as an example. Pre-call planner. That tool, if you think is worthwhile, that should be used every single time. Now, that means that you can't tell people to use every tool and don't follow up. But just like the Sandler terms, there has to be a subset of tools that you have been using from Sandler that needs to be implemented on a daily basis by everybody. And those are the ones that you should collect and say, this, as a group, we're using these tools. That doesn't mean you're going to use other tools, but these are the ones that are no option behavior. Very important. All right, this is a biggie. So methodology versus sales process. People are very confused. So I think you should match in your process to the methodology. Sandler is a methodology, right? So every single company that we work with has a sales process. Your sales process is different than KPMG. Your sales process is going to be different than Salesforce. We all have nuances. We all have ways that we're going to go to the market. Like I train Dell, they have a 10-step process. I've got another one that's got a 3-step process. So that doesn't matter. But what happens is the disconnect for some people is, how do I use Sandler? Where do I use this stuff? Okay, that was a slick move. I like that. You know, let's say the 30-second commercial or an upfront contract. Okay, that's great as a standalone tactic. Where do I use it? Yes, I've learned it on the phone call. I get it. But if we map where upfront contracts fit throughout their process, and hey, it's going to fit right before you do proof of concept. Proof of concept for a technology company is pretty common. You better have a rock solid upfront contract right there. And so if we can match your what with our how and when, perfect. So salespeople get confused because they sit in a classroom and say to themselves, I don't see where that fits. I don't know where we would use this. And when they start thinking that, then they're not going to use it. The other thing that happens is, why would they practice in front of a live prospect? If they don't see the application, they don't see how they would do it, and where and why, then they're not going to do it. It's our job to take all that away, to create a mindless activity. We should be able to say, here's how we're overlapping those two things. Now, the question is, do you have a sales process? I don't know. We should talk about that, because maybe that's the confusion. Now, that would be an opportunity for the trainers to drill down and do some more work. Reviews. At sales meetings, I don't use it as an opportunity to reinforce. So it doesn't have to be every single time, but why doesn't somebody on the team take a topic and kind of share it with everybody? Look, we've learned a lot of stuff from Sandler. I'm going to highlight, right, passing the baton during team selling. And here's what it means. And here's how we would use it in our day-to-day. I think we could use it in these 3 places. And then it starts a conversation. What does that do? Well, if it were me, I would give the people who are the weakest at those particular topics that topic to share with everybody, because they're going to be, in it, diving, right? So they're going to learn it, which is a good thing. But I think it also helps connect the dots. How do I use that in my day-to-day world? And by the way, you could tell them, I could tell them where it fits, but there's far more credibility when a coworker says, super important, here's how you do it, here's where you do it, and here's when you do it. So much better, right? Because people don't argue with their own data. So I'd rather hear it from a coworker, far more credibility. And we know that, right? So this is important. Pick it, doesn't have to be everyone. And by the way, if your sales meetings are super exciting and people, can't wait to see them, maybe this doesn't fit. But I think from a driving the DNA stuff, it does fit. Sandler Online. Hey, look, a couple different things you should be creating. You have the ability to use in Sandler Online the virtual playbook. You can, with your trainer, create learning paths that are applicable to the team so they don't have to just see everything. There's a million things that we could be doing on that, but usage, we should be tracking usage. We're happy to do that with you. So I think if we can get them to use that as part of the DNA, now they don't even have to sign in. They can now use Alexa. They just say, hey, give me, John Rosso on prospecting. Here comes 5 options. We got to drive them to the reinforcement. I cannot see them often enough. We're only going to see them, whatever it is, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year. There's no way that you could go to the gym, 4 times a year and expect some huge change. So we got to drive them to where they're going to get more content. The question is, what content should they be listening or watching? That's what we should be working on. This is the big one now. Success stories. You should not wait for them. You should cause them. Cause them, right? You could say Sandler's awesome. I'm going to certainly say Sandler's awesome, right? But how cool is it when they say, here's what I have been using? So let's talk about that. And I can give you case study after case study with this. But I would say to your sales managers or your salespeople, depending on who I'm talking to, I want a success story. I want a success story from each of your teams. I don't care who on your team it is. I want a success story, and I want 1 a week or 1 a month, whatever the number is, but put a number on it and tell them when you want it and how many. Now, what's that going to do? Well, how cool is it when you have an audio file? And it has to be an audio file, because here's the breakdown. No one wants to type a success story, right? You can't even get people to put data into CRM. So no one's going to type a 2-page success story. Make it easy, make it stupid simple. So have them just talk into the phone, and it'll transcribe into an audio file, which you can give to everybody. And by the way, you could do that from a Word document too, if you're creating also a playbook. So if I said, look, here's the upfront contract, I used it in the following manner, and it shrank the sales process, and we closed a deal worth X, Y, and Z. Wow. Now, what is that doing? Let's peel that back. Well, that's from somebody on my team, right? I'm a salesperson. I'm competitive. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm saying. Yeah, they're good. But if they can do it, for crying out loud, oh my goodness gracious, I can do it, right? So that must be an okay thing. I might as well let Mikey try that technique. It looks like it works. I'll use it. So now it's a little safer, right? Here's the other thing. Managers get to see ROI. Why? Because they're telling you where they implemented and what the outcome was. It helped me close that business. It helped me walk away from a dead deal. It helped me do this. Those little stories help senior leadership, especially with a long selling cycle. You're not going to see a huge ROI, in the short term, because you can't. because the sales cycle doesn't match. This is huge. Audio Acrobat, simple concept. When we did Cemex gave everybody an iPad, right? So here's what happened. They had success stories, and then senior leadership picked the best success story. And the best success stories, and they had one for each of the groups. Each month they got an iPad. So people were crazy. They've got hundreds of success stories. So it just kind of builds, right? And especially if I'm not using it, I'd be like, well, everybody else is using this. It seems to be working. I seem to be outnumbered. Because if no one's actually sharing success stories, it may not be working. But if I'm the one who's not using Sandler, everybody's doing it. It gives you as a leader more opportunity to say, hey, you're gonna get up on the boat or off the boat, whatever the case is. So we do this almost every corporate account that we can, just between us. This is a huge one. And it's stupid simple. And by the way, you don't have to give them anything. You know what they really love? They love what's called the super stroke. The super stroke is when senior leadership says, that's an awesome success story. Did you hear Jeremy's success story? That was fantastic. I think we should all be doing this. And it's coming from upstairs. You don't think people don't like that? They love that. Everybody wants a stroke. It's called a super stroke, right? Because it skips a couple levels. Make it a priority. I know you think you did, and I get it. But here's what we have to ask ourselves. Is there an attitude of entitlement? Which means, do you have a culture of allowing people to pick and choose what they're going to do and what they're going to follow? So let me give an example. CRM is important for everybody. Okay. And I'm sure, depending on where you are in the CRM life cycle, somewhere in the beginning though, some people did CRM and some people didn't. Some people said, I have my own way to do it. Some people said, we're going to wait to see if this actually sticks around. So why would I inconvenience myself? Some people said, well, this is just a management big brother tool. But eventually you have to get everybody on board. So here's the disease. The entitlement disease is when you say, I'm not going to mess with that group right now. Let me deal with the ones who are enthusiastic supporters of Sandler. Okay, but you're sending the wrong signal. If you're going to decide to go to Salesforce as a CRM, or if you're going to decide to do X, then as an organization, I think you should be doing it unless you've made it very clear that group over there has to do nothing. But if you haven't made that public announcement, here's what people are thinking. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Now, I'm going to do it because I heard the success stories. I get it. But he doesn't have to do it. She's not doing it. I've got 5 kids. Can you imagine if I told 4 of the kids to do something and maybe they didn't want to do it, but I said, listen, everyone has to do this. Natalie, you don't have to do it, honey. How's that going to go? How do you think that's going to look? But that's what you do every single day. We shouldn't be doing it on this. Either get them out, and so they're off to the side, but I don't think we can have them participate with this entitlement. Now, it's not my decision. And sometimes I don't put this one up, but if I see it, I'll put it up because it's an awesome management conversation. These are just conversation jumpers as well, right? So that's what this is. Love this one. This is another, 90%er always there. And what this is we're holding contests. And holding contests is where they're going to select from the hot lists, right? So you see consistency on the hot list, upfront contracts, 30-second commercial, pain statements. We'll use those as examples. Awesome, great. Let's have a contest. Let's do this. Everybody give us their best 30-second commercial, their best upfront contract. And you can pick by persona, you can pick by product, and I would do it by product and by persona because you're gonna get more, because here's what happens. When you get their submissions for the contest, you have to assume you're getting the best that they can do. They're not going to do it once. Right? Somebody's not going to say, oh my gosh, I got to do that upfront contract. Yeah, let me just wing it here for a second because the CEO is going to listen to it. Hi, Fred, I'm here. Anything I could do for you? That's mine. That's not going to work out. That's not an upfront contract. You know what they probably did? They practiced like 50 times because they probably even hit delete. They want the best of the best of the best sample to be their representation because their name's on it, right? I have pride, I've got ego, I don't want to look foolish. So you've won because they've practiced. It's becoming part of their talk track. Awesome. You also win because when you select the ones that you love, you now have a playbook. You've created a playbook through contests because you're going to take the best of the best of those topics and say, here it is. Here it is. And when you onboard people, how cool would it be to say, this is the best of the best of all of our talk tracks. Listen to this. How cool is that? So this is important. I just told you what a super stroke is, which is a senior leader. They're the ones selecting, and they're the ones who are giving all the strokes. It flies. Learning pods, if you're in the financial services world at all, they used to have, they still do, study groups where people are getting together on topics, on themes. We set up learning pods within organizations. That's small little subgroups that are focused on, hey, team selling, and they're talking about how they can get better implementation. Basically, what it is, it's a little study group off to the side that gets together in between the times that we get together. We have all the instructions on how to get it done. This works in some cultures, in some cultures it does not. So we have to pick and choose on this one. Role play. Well, listen, I think you need a role play culture. If you're going to drive Sandler into the organization, certainly you can continue to call us. I got that part. That's easy. But also what happens is that they need to understand, how do I do it? See, adults learn by imitation and illustration. So they're going to mimic you. So you could tell them to do an upfront contract. You could tell them to do that. It's fine. But wouldn't it be better if you showed them how to do it? Now, if you don't have a PhD, that's okay. Don't worry about it. You know what you're going to do? You're going to give them the best 30-second commercial from the contest and say, this is what I want you to do. Now, role play, and we're going to give them the 4 steps of role play over here, but I think your sales managers should be role playing at least with those key concepts at Sandler all the time. I mean, they can do a role play in 3 to 4 minutes. This is not a, hey, everybody, go get cocktails. It's a death march. We're going to be here for hours. We're going to have no prisoners. People are going to be floating on the beach because we're role playing. Role playing is nothing more than practice, right? So let's call it practice. But we should be, if you don't think your sales managers are role playing at least 3-4 times a day, we should have a session on role playing, because there's a serious gap. There's a big miss because they're not driving it down. See, they're not driving it, and that's important, because if I saw something that wasn't a true upfront contract, I can say, hey, that was terrible. Oh yeah, that's okay. But why wouldn't I show them what a good one looks like? And then they can do that. So it's part of our coaching. So this will kind of do 2 things. 1, drives implementation. And 2, it helps your managers become super, super strong. But also then, we also then would be able to shrink the amount of time it takes to own Sandler, right? Because there's a difference between knowing and owning, and role play helps you own. Your ears have to hear what your mouth is saying. No one wants to practice in front of a prospect. So I'd love to practice here. And so we have to set up an environment where it's safe to do that. And so that's what this is. Leadership. Well, I think you need to, involve as much as we can. We've talked about this. So what is that? I think there's a couple things that we should do. Number 1, every time we do a program. Now, I'm not talking about reinforcement webinars, but there should be a senior leader kicking off that day, especially like not even negotiable. They should be they should kick off our kickoff. And it's very important. Why? Because senior leadership is up there. It's not sales enablement. It's not, a sales manager. It's not, hey, this is Dave, go for it. None of that. They're going to stand up and say, this is what we saw. These are the issues that we're trying to attack. This is why we think it's good for us. And this is why we pick Sandler. We'll help you do it, but they have to kick it off, because that shows everyone else that this may not be, and this too shall pass type program. Others, I would also say that, I would give the senior leaders maybe 5 to 10 questions that they should be asking all the time, right? Because when you ask Sandler-esque type questions, that sends the signal, oh my goodness, they actually know Sandler, so I can't smoke them. I better get on the ball. So it's things like, what's your clear next future? Okay. Hey, what's that monkey's paw? So let's get the 10 that we should be knowing, using all the time. And that way it's easy. It's easy for you. You don't have the PhD, and you're sending the signals. You're sending it's important, and you're congruent, and it's not going to pass, right? It's going to be here. We've selected Sandler. This is one that probably very few trainers do, and it's a huge win. So I think big deal strategy looks like this. Everyone can bring their number one deal, like their big deal. And they can do this in subgroups, or you could do it as a whole team. And what happens is they explain the deal, and the team gets to say, well, hey, have you done this? Did you do this? Did you do this? So everybody's debriefing, right? It's like a sales mastery class. It's like a president's club. But you're doing it for their deals. Now, what happens? First of all, you should do it in the beginning. You know, hopefully they would have the ability to do it at the end, but why do you do it? Well, you're doing it, so A, it's done properly in the beginning, but B, it's a hell of an ROI thing, because here's why. When you help companies close deals that they brought to you, not, hey, Sandler's working. We brought 6 deals, we closed 4 of those. Our average is 20%, so we're up 2. This is flipping awesome. That right there paid for the whole year. If you're not doing this, each one of these should pay for your whole year. And that's very easy to show a senior exec right there. These are the deals we talked about. Here's what was closed. And they're going to say, well, that's awesome. But they also could say, well, these would have closed. Some of these would have closed. Maybe, but your standard average is, as I said, 20%, we closed 40. So this is a big win. So when you have your reviews, you have your renewals with your contracts, trying to get to that, the renewal, these are the types of, these are the deals we worked on, these are the deals that closed. So this is more than a hot list, and this is more than a feel good. This is you breaking down a deal and helping them close it. You do this naturally, you do it all the time. You should do it for your clients so you can show ROI and momentum. Again, I sit back. In addition to ROI, why is this a big deal? Well, if I'm a participant in the program and I can bring a deal to the table, and maybe I didn't think I had a great chance, or maybe I would have closed it anyways, who knows? But if I can show the participants that Sandler had an impact in closing a big deal, which gave them a commission, right? Then I'm paying attention to that. It's not a, oh, I love Sandler story. It's, we did this last month and look what happened. That'll also help your sales managers get on the stick and just make it part of their daily routine. This is important. This is really, and you've talked about it, but this will help your pipeline hygiene as well, because you're going to bring deals that you thought were closing anyways by the end of the month or end of the quarter. And what you're going to find out pretty quickly is that they aren't really on track to close. And so this helps you also understand what's reality coming down the pike. Manage your commitment. So this one, look, the question is, are they totally committed? I think that, we have to figure that out. And I would say at that point, here's what's going on over here. But I think managers should go through the program first. So given the choice, and even if management is not part of your engagement, if you can get in front of management to show them how to support the salespeople, that's a win. If you can get in front of management to do any of these things, that's a win. I need sales managers to be totally committed. And, we're going to talk about that in a second, but to me, this is important. And this is, I tell them what they have to do here. Certification, super important. Certification for us is taking them through the Sandler selling system. And now, what is certification? Well, bronze certification is, do you know the material? Silver is, can you actually apply it? They're going to go through bronze. And the reason why that's important is because you can rest assured that if everyone goes through bronze certification, then at least they have a working knowledge of the Sandler selling system. Even if they weren't paying attention in class, or whether they heard a good idea and they were still thinking about it when we gave them the next good idea, they would have gone through that process and, listened to the audios, watched the videos, taken a quick quiz, and it helps you validate at least they went through the Sandler selling system. But here's what else it does for you. It forces people into Sandler Online for reinforcement. It also helps you because you'll know who's going through certification at what rate. So you'll see that those people are just zipping up, and these people over here haven't even logged on yet. So there must be an issue. And by the way, those people over here all work for the same sales manager. Wow, isn't that interesting? Right? Because they have their own little culture there. We know in corporate, I have a much higher renewal rate, much higher, when we do certification versus when we do not. We have tracked this over time. So when people want to throw stuff out from a pricing perspective, we tend to fight like dogs to keep certification in for all the good reasons for them. But for you, it also will ensure a higher process for renewals. So if you don't make this part of your thing, we do, and quite frankly, the way we found out was by accident, because we noticed that the renewal rates for certification were higher. And that's when we said, well, wait a minute now, what are we doing here? This shouldn't be an option. It should be you will do. And that's what it's become. It's a you will do. Like this one. In order for us to use the material, maybe what we should do is less is more. And let me tell you what I mean by that. My fear is when we deal with companies and we see them, maybe it's 3, 4, 5 times a year. What we sometimes hear is, hey, we're going to review the upfront contract. We're going to talk about where else to put that in the sales process. So that way we can match process with methodology. And no, we already covered the upfront contract. Oh my God, if I hear that word again, I'm going to shoot myself. I don't want an upfront contract. Let's hear something new. I promise you'll hear it a million times. And so they want something new. Now, that sounds good, and I fell into that trap for like 10 years, I promise you. Which, by the way, forced me to learn a ton of new stuff all the time. But let's just kind of what they said and what they meant maybe. You and I both know they're not implementing the upfront contract the way they should be. They only heard it once. Maybe they heard it twice. So it's not going to stick. So when they say, let's learn something new, I know that's exciting, but that's also could be, maybe not your company, could be because I'm not using that and I don't want to talk about that. So let's learn something new that I also will not use. Let's get them to use what we've taught them before we move on to the next thing, right? So it's kind of like math. If you don't have the math, you don't have the foundation, why would we be talking about X, Y, and Z? It doesn't fly. So I would suggest we resist the push, and you also send them messages. Let's implement what we've learned. Let's drill it down. So if you want Sandler to stick, you've got to select the things that we're going to drive. Because if you have over 100 tools, you've got 2,000 hours worth of content here. There's no way we can do it all day long. Listen, you wind me up, I'm happy to talk about whatever you want. It's not a big deal. But I want your people to be using it. So I think we should less is more. We should be more case studies, more where would you do it, that type of thing. Cookbooks. So the cookbooks here are for your sales managers. Now, what does that mean? That just means a recipe for success, or it means let's create a behavioral plan for our managers on how to reinforce Sandler, right? So here's what it looks like for salespeople, and I'll explain it if they haven't been in the program. But we should be doing that for your leaders, because out of all the things that we've talked about, some are good ideas today, some are good ideas on a weekly basis, and some are good ideas on a quarterly basis. Some may not be any good for your company. So what we should say is, out of all things that we've talked about, how we're going to drive Sandler, we're going to take these 6. And this is the frequency by which We want you as a company to get that done. Like as an example, I said to you, hey, a sales manager should be role playing, 3 to 5 times a day. If they're interacting with their salespeople all the time and they're not just admins, right? So that could be the cookbook, but they should be doing success stories once a week. They should have somebody doing a sales meeting with a topic once a month. So that's what we're talking about. That's how you manage the behavior to make sure it's being implemented. Because otherwise, what they're going to say is, hey, we spent a lot of money. I want this Sandler stuff. I want this part of our company. We've got some success. We've got some gaps. Let's go. Okay, I get it. This is what we will help you create, if you so choose, that will drive our sales managers to help the implementation of what we're learning. Drip sequence. The other way that we can make sure is that the content that's coming out of Sandler Online matches what we'll be teaching. Because it's always nice to get something on upfront contracts, you learn upfront contracts, and then you maybe get something at the end versus, I heard something about goal setting and now we're doing upfront contracts. Again, let's be thematic and let's just stay on what's important. So for me, those are the things that I spend time on with leaders. And again, we manipulate this based on the culture of the company. We can make it very specific with their words on it. But I've done this, quite a few times in different scenarios. Did it, what's today's step? So I did it twice in August for different organizations. And they have both mastery and, because I did one for Mark McGraw's clients, who were all mastery clients. And he said, yeah, absolutely. So they spent a whole day in their management program talking about what they should be doing with this. So I think for you as trainers, these are conversation starters. These are thought provokers. These are, springboards to help implement, get everybody on board, get success across the team, determine whether it's some soft ROI, if there's not, a measurable ROI, which again, I would tell you is hard for most companies. So this is what I use. So when they said, hey, let's talk a little bit about driving management into an organization, I could have said, well, this is how you sell management, those things. But that, to me, how do you get managers to be raving fans? And how do you get them to take you from company to company to company? And how do you get their salespeople to use it as quickly as possible so you can renew? So when they leave and they're raving fans because you've made them a boatload of money, they take you with them as well. So hopefully that's helped. Happy to answer any questions. We didn't do breakouts for this because this was just me sharing my presentation, which I give to them. This is done, when I'm in front of a management team. This is done one-on-one. This is done a lot of different ways. So with that, we'll take any questions, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dave. Quick round of applause for Dave in your own rooms. Any questions from, throw them in the chat or unmute yourself if you're brave, and we can do that. Yeah, after we've got the slide deck and stuff that we can share.
Hi, Dave.
Hey,
Dave, thanks for that. That was fantastic. Just a quick question about what you mentioned, something on Mark McGraw's clients. Have I understood it correctly that he took, or you took, his management program through these in order to facilitate a conversation to get them to work through these and figure out how they were going to get Sandler in the DNA of their companies? Did I read that right?
Yeah, so Mark McGraw has a monthly management meeting. It's 3 hours long. He brings in a speaker on a topic, and then they use the rest of them the rest of the time to kind of drill down on that topic. And so he probably had, I don't know, 35, 30, some group in the mid 30s, all their different industries. Some did mastery with corporate work, some did just mastery, most of them. I explained this because they have people, whether it's a corporate account or whether you're doing corporate work or whether it's doing mastery, you still have people at different levels of acceptance and, hey, I'm using it. So they found it as a huge benefit. And there was a huge, it was cross-pollination of different size companies, different industries, and what they bought from Mark.
Yeah, I think there's, lots of us maybe a bit reticent to start our management training. We started the sales mastery piece, and I absolutely get that up and running. But actually, this is some of the pain hooks, if you like, to move to start the sales management or to start the management piece. And as Dave said on one of his talks, there's lots of stuff from the sales mastery which we can actually use in the sales management. You can start off by not learning any new stuff. We can start off using DIST, using upfront contracts for their internal meetings. How do they know their people? There's a whole load of stuff that we can that once you know the sales mastery, that you can move into the management piece without having to learn a ton of new stuff, and then you just adding the new stuff piecemeal as you come in.
Right. That's how I did it.
Awesome. Paul, you've asked what would be the top 4 you would pretty much always suggest. I'm guessing you do all of them, Dave.
Does that mean for me?
Yeah. Do you mean top 4, Paul, of the elements just Dave went through in terms of like creating a sales manager playbook, all those kind of things? Okay.
So for me, I'm big on the hot lists. Contests are, all the time. Success stories, all the time. So those are 3. And then from that point, it really depends on what's going on. So larger companies love the learning pods, but for the most part, I'll always go into involved leadership, where you create those 10 questions where they continually ask. So the sales force and everybody else, thinks it's super important. They're asking those questions, and it helps the leaders as well, because I don't want them to feel anxious, because they don't know Sandler either, right? They probably weren't even paying attention to Sandler the first time you went in there, because depending on the size of the company, they've been taught, just smile and grin, baby. This will be over shortly. You're going to go to another thing here. Don't worry about it. Just smile and grin. But, it's interesting. When I did Rackspace, they fell into a very typical pattern, which was the salespeople loved it. Then the sales managers started to love it. Seniors, like the next layer up, not until year 2, at the end of year 2, did they actually even pay attention. They actually knew how to spell Sandler, because they're like, well, we didn't realize it was going to stick. I mean, every time we do something, no one likes it, so we don't pay attention to it. So they were throwing budget money and not really driving it down. They were giving their, hey, do this, but they're like, there's just a company culture. We've just got so many stuff. So it's kind of interesting. So to Sean's point, this does get them involved.
Awesome. Nigel, you had a question there, your top 4 tools. Do you want to expand on that?
You're muted.
Yeah, I love all the tools. I get my clients using them. I'm curious if you were to recommend to your managers, hey, here are the top 3-4 tools that to use on a daily, weekly basis that becomes a habit. From your experience, what are the top 3 or 4?
I can actually go back and have them tell you what they are, actually, so I wouldn't even have to guess for you. I mean, they tend to be different depending on what's going on, but certainly pre-call planner is always there, right? So, you've got there, we're taking different tools from SCS depending on what is, but that's there. Upfront contract, Kyra's there, sure. So you've got that. We typically would use upfront contract creator, 30-second commercial creator in the beginning, right? So you want people to create those are always there. And then it's whatever it is, kind of moves along here a little bit, but I can ask them, they'll tell you. I mean, I'll get it for you. 10 out of 10 times, these are the ones. 6 out of 10 times, here are the other ones.
I love what you said there, just to simplify it for them. Pick just a few and just use them. Love it.
In the beginning, they're going to pick, they're picking creation tools in the beginning, right? And then they're going to pick the other tools. Like, pre-call planner is not a creation tool. That's a, I'm implementing tool. So it's a little different depending on where they are in the life cycle as well, but less is more, to your point.
Yeah.
Pick 4.
Love it.
Caroline, you had a question. Can you share more of those 10 questions they should be asking? Caroline, do you want to give some context?
Yeah, so Dave, you were saying one of the strategies was to get them to really understand what the sort of 5 to 10 questions they should be consistently asking their people. Was just wondering if you could share a few more examples of those.
Yeah, so I take the debrief list out of the management course, which you all have, right? I think, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you have the list of debrief questions? Okay. So from that list, if you look at the list, it's basically bucketed by whether it's development questions, whether it's, you know, appointment questions, funnel questions. So what you do is that you match the questions to where their pains are, right? So if, for instance, if they have a very poor conversion from you know, a trial to, say, close, then they would be asking things like, well, what's the clear next future? Did you get senior management to fingerprint this before we started? You know, those would be the types of questions that would come out of the training that mirror the Sandler selling system, but is appropriate to what is going on in their world. So it's okay that they're going to be using very specific questions in their sales process, which would help them say, did you use a Sandler methodology here? What happened here? And so that's what happens. So it's different for a lot, but if you think about it, depending on what the role is, right? So AEs would have a series of questions, BDRs would have a different one, but that's what it is. And I'm happy to send you that list. And I'm happy to go in the archives and pick, you know, one we did for somebody and give it to you. It's not a big deal. Happy to do it.
Great, thank you.